All right, Maurice Davis has committed to the Ole Miss Rebels today. The 6'5" edge out of Georgia. Lots of upsides to him. We're going to react to it completely. But this is the Locked On Ole Miss Podcast Extra Edition, Reaction Edition.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss Podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, so please tune in for that. Thank you for watching and all of that stuff. We are Ole Miss. Ole Miss every day. That is our mantra, so thank you for tuning into that. All right, so Maurice Davis has committed to the Ole Miss Rebels, and people are going to look at him and think it might be a little bit of an issue whenever you're looking at the sure things. And Maurice Davis is not a sure thing. And the reason he is not a sure thing is his pure build. He has a chance to grow into a big player that is 6'5", 260 pounds, Kamarion Franklin-like size. But he's not there right now. You still have to do that. You still have to build that. You still have to develop that. But this is a football player that we're going to show you a few of his highlights a little bit later on in the show, to where violence is a feature in his game, not a bug. This is a violent player. And a lot of people talk about, hey, I want a player that's aggressive, because it's easier to teach a player to settle down a little bit than to make them an aggressive player to start with. Or, in the end, it's hard to build that. You kind of are what you are. But he is a really, really good player athletically. If we look at his offers that he obviously had an Ole Miss offer as a commit. Louisville was pushing really hard for his commitment. USF, he took a visit to Tampa. Honestly, I would not blame anybody for taking an official visit to Tampa, Florida. It is my favorite city in the United States. Offer to Cincinnati, offer to Texas A&M. James Madison, who is really good at basically finding diamonds in the rough and creating them in a profile that fits them. That's their thing. They're interested in him. Texas A&M, that is used to buying extremely talented players, they're interested in him. So you can see that he's flashing in a lot of different areas for these teams. Arkansas State also offered Troy. There's several G5 offers as well. So really good football player in my opinion. There's no way you can look at that and say otherwise. Now, if you go back to his original ranking, let's put up his profile because it has the industry standard on there. On3 has him as a borderline 4-star. 247 has him a little bit lower than that. ESPN and Rivals has not rated this prospect. I think whenever Rivals put out their commitment graphic, our friend John Garcia put out a commitment graphic and they listed him as a 5'5". And it's just one of those players that has not been rated. And there's so many players, so few analysts, it's hard to get these people rated from time to time. Really, really good football player. But moving on, whenever you look at the highlights of exactly what this player is, and like I said, here they are. Violence is a feature in his game. He plays the game in a very violent way, on the edge. You can see him playing in a way, grabbing with the quarterback, throwing down ball carriers. His speed and athleticism on the edge absolutely will play at the SEC level. The only thing that you need to do with this player, the only thing, is to build him up to where instead of 6'5", 210, he's 6'5", 250. 40 pounds have to come on. He needs to hit the training table and keep his athleticism. If that happens, honestly, the comp for me, whenever I watch his highlights, is probably DJ Holmes from Pahokee, the Ole Miss signee that signed in February, that led the nation in sacks. He has the same get-off, the same athleticism, maybe undersized in few areas. Now, granted, Maurice Davis is 6'5", when DJ Holmes is probably closer to 6 foot, but there's still the not prototypical size that you see in a high school player. Really, really good football player. Just period. He's a good football player, and I think I think people should be excited about this get no matter what they say on recruiting, because at the end of the day, like I tell you guys, roster building in the 21st century is about constructing the 85. It's never over. There's never a moment where you won or you lost. It's all about trying to improve where you are. You know, you have a situation where Ole Miss brought in Austin Simmons, and freshman quarterback, very, very highly thought of, going to get to campus, and then you have Damon Williams is like, wait a second, I'm going to come in and be fourth on that depth chart. And if everything goes according to plan, I may not see the field until I'm a junior. And that there's no quarterback in modern college football that's going to be okay with that. And honestly, Ole Miss fans should be okay with that as well. Because if he shows up, great. If he moves on, okay, you're fine. Maurice Davis is the other side of that coin. Whenever you look at the roster, what you're building, and we talk about what Pete Golding is trying to do with the jack position and the edge position in his defense. This is a player that made Marcus Davenport into a first-round NFL pick at UTSA. Whenever people see Pete Golding, they think Alabama. I'm telling people they probably need to think UTSA and what he did with that defense more so than what he did with Alabama. And if you look at the players that he is bringing in to this defense, whether through the transfer portal or recruiting, it's pretty impressive, and you can honestly see exactly what he's trying to accomplish. Transfer portal, they're bringing in the guys that they can play right now, nearly finished products, and they're using recruiting to find guys that they can build. It's not a situation where you need 6 4-stars on defense like Alabama goes through every year. No, the transfer portal is where they're doing the damage on the defensive side of the ball. Now, in recruiting, you can find people that you can build up to where, hey, we've got time to get this player where he needs to be as a part of building that 85. And some people are going to look at what Ole Miss is doing in high school recruiting and say, oh, well, that isn't what we thought. But some people aren't seeing the whole picture. Because at the end of the day, these players are going to get matched with that transfer portal. You can't really talk about, for instance, DJ Holmes as a signee. He's a 3-star signee without talking about Monty Montgomery. Stuff like that. You can't talk necessarily about some stud defensive back. You know, Santarian Perkins, a 5-star on linebacker, without mentioning Isaac Ukwu. This is a full package defensively, and it is up to this coaching staff to develop them and find the best 11 to play as part of the best 44 to put on the field as part of the best 85. And the whole goal is to make each of those better. And this signing will absolutely do that if the kid develops and puts on weight like I think he will. Because this kid at 250 pounds, as we saw in his highlights, has a chance to be a really, really dominant player in the Southeastern Conference. This is the best college football level in the country. He has a chance to compete at that, which means, I'm telling you right now, if I say you can compete in that, I think you're an NFL player. All right, so who is next? That's the interesting question. Who is next? Because the two names that were flashing whenever this commitment came up was Maurice Davis or Dylan Hipp. And you see a lot of stuff online where Ole Miss is recruiting Dylan Hipp. Now, I am wanting to take kind of a step back with Dylan Hipp and potentially even Caleb Odom. Because one of the mainstays, I think, in the recruitment might have been Damon Williams. And if Damon Williams is not at Ole Miss, there's nobody to pull him there. I think Caleb Odom, whenever Damon Williams decommitted, was gone. It's over. Nobody even needs to pay attention to that commitment time. I think those two are tight players. And it wasn't necessarily a package deal, but getting him would have been a bullet in Ole Miss's gun, if that makes sense. Now, Dylan Hipp is from Arizona, just like Damon Williams. And I do not know if these players are joined or if the reason Dylan Hipp was interested was because of Damon Williams. I'm not willing to just lay it out that that is absolutely happening. But I think it would be kind of silly to not factor that into the Dylan Hip recruitment. And whenever this kid commits, it looks like it's either Ole Miss or Baylor right now. But since he hasn't committed yet, I don't know if we need to count chickens. So what I think, other than Dylan Hip, that Ole Miss is, they're in big game hunting mode in high school recruiting. Their high school class is essentially done, with the exception of recruiting players like Kamarion Franklin and players that Ole Miss would always recruit. But the transfer portal starts to become a bigger part. And as the season gets closer, people are going to start paying attention to players as potential avenues for the player personnel office. They'll start looking at other college teams. So other than big name high school players, big game hunting, the transfer portal is going to become the piece. You might see that Ole Miss is looking at a running back, somebody to replace Ulysses Bentley IV. It could be in the transfer portal. It might be a high school player as well. I think there's a Nebraska commit that they're in on. Chris Davis, they're not going to stop recruiting him. But they're going to recruit one. And it's either going to be the transfer portal or it's going to be this special high school group, because they are happy with their running back room. They are happy with their quarterback room, period. Happy with the wide receiver room. Offensively, they are in a really good spot. Defensively, they're obviously starting to shuffle players out, and they're trying to retool that roster on that side of the ball, because what Chris Partridge did is different than what Pete Golding is going to do. Remember, in football, system is everything. There's no such thing as just a great football player. It's always a great football player doing X. So a player that is really good in Chris Partridge's system may not be good in Pete Golding's system. And that's just the way it works. And yes, I understand that is why 5 stars, who is more versatile in systems than 3 stars, are important. But we're not in the position to where we can get them right now. We don't have the money. We don't have the resources. We don't have anything. We're sitting firmly in the middle of the SEC is what we can do in recruiting. So knowing that means we're going to have to develop 3 stars. We're going to get to pick players from the G5, and they will serve as a minor league. And we have a chance to build a roster that way. Understand that. Be okay with that. And try to maximize that. Because this is what you need to know. The Manning Center, by the way, is a couple of days from being opened, about a week away from the grand opening of the renovated Manning Center. That Manning Center is home to a player personnel office that is the greatest in Ole Miss football history. Those guys are always working. They are always looking for ways that they can create advantages in ways that previous Ole Miss staffs, David Cutcliffe and those guys, when it was David Cutcliffe and Kent McLeod, and that was essentially the recruiting department, has turned into basically an NFL-style player personnel office, to where they're looking for players to fit needs and advantages that they can make wherever they need. If they need a linebacker, all of a sudden that player personnel office off the top of their head can say, hey, what about this guy at Boise State? Should we look at him? Would he fit? And there's a top 5 list that's going down. So understand that this isn't recruiting the way that we used to recruit. And in the age of NIL and all the other stuff, I've consistently said that this is different. But if you view this in the context of we want to have the best 85 players that we can, and that's what they're doing, in all rooms and all avenues, offense best 11, best 22, team best 44, scholarships best 85. That's what they're trying to do. So understand that if somebody doesn't go to your school, they have a list of 5 other names that they can immediately go to. And it might not be high school. It might be a situation where Ole Miss doesn't sign a running back out of high school this year. And there's no name above that line of who is recruitable worth doing. So they're going to find somebody above that line on the transfer portal. That is just how they're going to work. The portal king is the portal king for a reason. And Maurice Davis is another example of how we can make this 85. We can make this 44 better by recruiting this player and developing him. The one thing that is going to scare me with players like Maurice Davis is, what if Ole Miss spends the time and develops him? He is a sophomore at 250 pounds, 6'5", and all of a sudden Georgia or Alabama comes into the picture. And you end up losing a player you developed, because that is always a possibility in this modern system. But I think this is a chance that Ole Miss has to take, honestly. You need to find the right niche. And right now that niche is heavy transfer portal, developmental players in high school recruiting, and obviously in that 4-hour halo, you're going after all the big stars. I think that is the avenue where Ole Miss can hit home. And I think that is the way they need to go, because transfer portal, they've proven they can do that. You look at that quarterback room, those are some dudes. We're happy about that. Now, in the high school game, it hasn't quite ticked up to that level. But is that a problem? I don't think it is. I think that's a part of an overall strategy. And people have been trying to guess the strategy of Lane Kiffin since he got to Oxford. And this year, whenever they signed 14 players, 15, 16 players, or committed them, everybody's like, well, obviously this is a sign that Lane Kiffin has put down roots, yada, yada, yada. You've heard all of that stuff. And I don't think so. I think that is more of a hallmark of the NCAA doing away with signing limits temporarily. And this is a way that through the transfer portal, you can cycle and use your roster while building them up closer to the 85. And because of that, it's all about building the best 85. It's not where they're caring about recruiting rankings or transfer portal rankings or anything like that. It's about combining them to create the best 85. And I think this is a step that is in that direction. I really like Maurice Davis. We're going to talk about him again on Monday's show. For people that don't watch these reaction videos, they'll be able to see highlights of him as well, and us talking about him as well. And I'll have a couple more days to marinate on what's going on with Maurice and this defense as a whole. Anyway, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Anyway, thanks to everyone. Tomorrow morning on the show, and my everydayers, thank you very much. Tomorrow morning, we will have an MLB draft preview with kind of an Ole Miss tie-in. We'll have Derek Vandy Griff on to talk about that. Tomorrow night, Tom Vanderford talking about how he is really liking the transfers on the defensive side of the ball. Should be a lot of fun. Anyway, thanks everybody for watching, and we will see you tomorrow. Take care.